3 elderly survivors of the Murchison earthquake were among the crowds gathered today to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the disaster. 17 people were killed when a magnitude 7.8 quake hit the town at the junction between Nelson and the West Coast. As the fallout from 1929 was remembered today, questions were also raised about preparations for the next big one. Our reporter Tracy Neal was at today's commemoration and filed this report.
The bell of St Paul's in the old gold rush town of Murchison tolled 17 times this morning. It marked the 17 lives lost in the quake. Ernie French was 4 years old when Murchison came crashing down around him. Tears welled as he recalled that day.
It goes back right to the beginning of my life.
Mr French says the family slept in the hay shed of the night of the quake that struck just after 10 in the morning.
It was safer there. The stock were being looked after, but word came through that we had to evacuate.
Mr French, now aged 94, was among about 280 people sent to Nelson. Most of the township was left homeless in the quake.
We walked off the farm down to what was called a cook place on the Buller, rode across the river, went in a dray across the Four River Plain, got to Murchison, stayed there a day or two, and then we were evacuated to Nelson.
Mr French is one of only 3 people still living who were in the Murchison quake. Eleanor Poynton and Isabel Monaghan, who were newborns at the time, were also at today's service, which began with a performance by the Murchison Area School Kapahaka group. Mrs Monaghan says today's service was one of many similar she has attended in Murchison over the years, but this one was special.
I'm a hospital patient at the moment and I'm on release today.
Mrs Monaghan says her only recollection is growing up in the shadow of the devastating quake and the effect on her mother.
I only recall the earthquakes, the minor little, and my mother would say, I'd say, oh, that's an earthquake, and Mum, oh, that's just minor.
The town's resident historian and a curator at the Murchison Museum, Judy Peacock, says the loss of 17 people in a town of 300 at the time runs deep today. She says 14 of those who died were killed by massive landslides. Many of the bodies have never been recovered. Christine Davies is the daughter of Doris White, who was rescued by her sister Gertie from a slip that buried their school.
June 17 could only be described as a normal morning with the fog down to its usual level, but strangely about 3 a.m. a slight earthquake was felt, and again at 7. This being more severe and was preceded by quite a large boom.
Mrs Davies said, reading from the family's record of events, that the children's mother hadn't wanted them to go to school that day. She felt disaster pending. The family record describes the quake as like being on a boat in a storm, and then the hills came down.
I yelled and we got to our feet and endeavoured to run back towards the building, but the slip overtook us and went straight through the school, leaving the roof perched on top. We were saved by some poplars and a chestnut tree.
Tasman District's Deputy Mayor Tim King says lessons from 1929 should never be forgotten. Mr King, who spoke at today's service, says it's a constant reminder of the need to always be prepared.
To know what to do if communication isn't as easy as it is normally in today's world. Things like having your food and water prepared. So my message is, given where we live and the likelihood of a number of different types of events interrupting our lives, that everyone should have a plan and be prepared.
He says recent natural disasters in Nelson, Tasman have proved that people are equipped to cope with future events, but the systems and processes we rely on perhaps aren't. In Murchison for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.